There are mornings that feel different before anything has happened. A quality in the air, something that the people who have worked in a building long enough come to recognize without being able to fully articulate. The clerk who had been processing cases in that courtroom for 14 years said afterward that she had felt it when she reviewed the docket that morning. Nothing specific, nothing she could point to. Just a sense that the day had a different weight to it, that something in the ordinary sequence of names and violations carried a charge that the surface of things did not reveal. She had learned to trust that feeling over 14 years. It had not been wrong often. The name on the docket was Anthony Ferrano, 26 years old. The name itself was not the thing. The name was common enough. It was what accompanied the name, what arrived in the room around it like weather, that changed the quality of the morning. Vincent Ferrano had been a presence in Providence for 40 years. Not a political presence, not a civic one, the kind of presence that existed in the spaces between official things, in the arrangements that got made in back rooms, and the understandings that were never written down, and the particular kind of authority that did not require a title because everyone already knew who held it. He had never been convicted of anything significant. He had been investigated several times over 4 decades by several different agencies, and the investigations had produced what investigations of men like Vincent Ferrano typically produced when those men were careful and patient and had spent their entire adult lives understanding exactly how close to the line they could operate without crossing it in ways that could be proven. They had produced nothing that held. He was, on paper, a retired businessman with interests in waste management and commercial real estate. In practice, he was something that everyone in Providence understood without needing to be told. His son, Anthony, was a different kind of creature. Where Vincent was contained and deliberate and had the quality of someone who had been shaped by consequence, even if consequence had never fully caught him, Anthony had been shaped by the absence of consequence. He had grown up watching his father's name open doors in silence rooms and produce results that had no visible mechanism. He had grown up understanding that there were 2 versions of how the world worked, the official version that applied to most people and the real version, which was the one his family navigated. He was not stupid. He was quick and observant and had inherited his father's ability to read a room. But he had grown up so thoroughly insulated from the normal friction of accountability that he moved through the world with a looseness, a certain physical and psychological ease that came from never having had to reckon with anything in a way that actually cost him. His violations were, on the surface, mundane. A vehicle registered to a company connected to the Ferrano waste management interests had been cited for illegal dumping in a residential area. Materials had been left in an alley behind a block of apartments at 2 in the morning, materials that had subsequently been identified as commercial waste that should have been processed through licensed disposal channels. The citation had been issued to the company, which meant it came to Anthony, who was listed as a director of the subsidiary in question. There was a second matter. A vehicle registered directly to Anthony had been involved in an incident on a highway outside the city, an altercation between his driver and another motorist that had resulted in a reckless driving citation, and a separate complaint filed by the other driver, who reported that following the altercation, a person in Anthony's vehicle had approached his car at a red light and said something to him through the window that the complaining motorist described as a threat, though the legal threshold for what constituted a chargeable threat was sufficiently specific that the matter had been filed as an addendum to the reckless driving citation rather than a separate charge. Anthony came to court with 3 men. None of them were lawyers. None of them had any formal role in the proceeding. They were simply men who moved with him the way certain kinds of men moved with certain kinds of people, close enough to be present and far enough to maintain the fiction of coincidence. They were well dressed in a particular way that had its own vocabulary, a vocabulary that people in Providence who were paying attention understood immediately. The gallery, which was already populated with the ordinary assortment of people waiting for their own cases, noticed the arrival, not loudly, not with any overt reaction, but a shift happened. A subtle collective adjustment in how people held themselves, the kind of unconscious physical response that happens when something enters a room that the body recognizes before the mind has finished processing it. The 3 men arranged themselves in the gallery. Anthony sat among them, and he sat differently than the other people in that room, not tensely, the opposite. with the particular relaxation of someone who had never found a room where he was not ultimately comfortable, because comfort in any room was something that had always been arranged for him in advance. The clerk felt it. The court officers felt it. The reporter from the local paper, who covered municipal court twice a week and who had covered it long enough to have context for the Ferrano name, felt it and opened his notebook with a care that was different from how he usually opened it. Judge Caprio was reviewing the next case. He looked up when the door opened, the way he always did, the way you did when you had been in a room long enough that you registered every change in it without making a production of registering it. He saw the men come in. He returned to his file. He finished the case in front of him with the same attention he always gave. He moved to the next. He was not hurried. He was not different. He was himself in the way that he was always himself, which was the thing about him that people who tried to work the room were never fully prepared for, because they were used to rooms that responded to pressure by adjusting, and he was a room that did not adjust. When Anthony Ferrano's name was called, there was a quality to the silence that followed it, just a fraction of a second longer than the usual silence before someone stood. Then Anthony rose. He moved to the front with the ease he carried everywhere. He stood before the bench and he looked up at Judge Caprio with the open, slightly amused expression of someone who was certain of how this would go because everything always went a certain way. Judge Caprio greeted him, same words, same tone. "How are you doing?" Anthony said he was doing well, thank you. His voice was relaxed, unhurried. The voice of a man who was not nervous, because nervousness was a response to uncertainty, and he had not felt genuine uncertainty in a very long time. Judge Caprio looked at the file. He took his time with it, more time than usual, though not in a way that was theatrical. He was reading something that required careful reading. He asked Anthony about the illegal dumping citation. He described the incident factually, the alley, the time, the nature of the materials, the company listing that connected the citation to Anthony. Anthony said it was a paperwork issue. He said the subsidiary used several contractors and that one of them had apparently made a disposal decision that didn't go through the proper channel. He said it had been addressed internally. He said the company took its environmental responsibilities seriously. Judge Caprio asked him which contractor. Anthony said he didn't have that information with him. Judge Caprio asked whether he could get it. Anthony said he could look into it. Judge Caprio said he would appreciate that. He made a note. He asked about the reckless driving citation. Anthony said his driver had been involved in a situation on the highway that had been exaggerated in the other party's account. He said his driver was a professional with a clean record and that what had been described as reckless driving was a normal response to an aggressive maneuver by the other vehicle. Judge Caprio asked about the complaint filed by the other driver. He said he was referring specifically to the addendum, the approach at the red light, what was said through the window. Anthony looked at him with an expression that was perfectly calibrated, not defensive, not concerned, the expression of a man responding to something he found mildly puzzling. He said he had no information about that. He said his driver had not mentioned any interaction at a red light. He said if something had been said by someone in his vehicle, it had been said without his knowledge or instruction. Judge Caprio looked at him for a moment. He said he wanted to be direct about something. He said that the complaint had been filed by a private citizen who had no prior relationship with Anthony or with anyone connected to him as far as the court could determine. He said that citizen had subsequently, and he said this carefully, expressed reluctance to pursue the matter further and had indicated they were not certain about the details of what had been said. Anthony nodded as if this was simply a piece of information being conveyed. Judge Caprio said he noted that reluctance in the file. He said he noted it without characterizing its origin. He said he simply noted it because it was there and because it was his practice to note things that were there. The room was very quiet. He said he wanted to ask Anthony something. He said it was not directly about the citations in front of him. He said it was a broader question and he was going to ask it directly because he believed in directness and because he thought Anthony was intelligent enough to appreciate it. He asked Anthony what he wanted his life to look like in 10 years. Anthony seemed genuinely surprised by the question. It was not the question he had prepared for. He had prepared for the legal choreography of the morning, the back and forth of citations and explanations and outcomes that would be managed the way things were managed. He had not prepared for a judge to look at him and ask about his future. He said he wasn't sure he understood the question. Judge Caprio said it was a simple question. He said he asked it of young people sometimes when he felt it was relevant. He said he thought it was relevant now. He said Anthony was 26 years old, and that 26 was a particular age. Not a crossroads in the dramatic sense, but a moment in a life when the direction of travel was becoming established in ways that were increasingly difficult to reverse. He said he was asking because he was genuinely curious. Anthony said he planned to continue growing the family business. Judge Caprio said he asked which part of it. Anthony said real estate primarily. He said waste management was stable, but that real estate was where the growth opportunities were. Judge Caprio nodded. He said those were legitimate industries. He said people built real things in those industries that had real value. He said the city depended on both. He said he meant that without irony. He paused. He said he wanted to tell Anthony something. He said he wanted to tell him, as a man who had watched Providence for decades, who had seen a great many things come through his courtroom, who had seen the full arc of what certain kinds of lives produced over time, not just the beginning, but the middle and the end. He said that the thing which Anthony had grown up inside, the particular structure of protection and insulation and managed outcomes, was not permanent. He said it felt permanent from the inside. He said it had the quality of something solid and reliable and always available. But he said that every person who had sat where Anthony was sitting, who had come from what Anthony came from, had eventually encountered the limits of what that structure could absorb. He said some of them had encountered those limits early and had made choices that changed their direction. He said some of them had encountered those limits very late, too late to change much, and that the courtrooms in which that encounter happened were not courts like this one. He said he was not making a threat. He was not implying anything about Anthony specifically. He said he was making an observation about how things tended to go over time for people who moved through the world the way Anthony had been moving through it. He said that the contractors who made disposal decisions without going through proper channels did so because the culture of the organization made them believe that was acceptable. He said that culture came from the top. He said that a man who wanted to build legitimate things in real estate needed to build a culture that actually meant it, not one that said it in front of a judge and meant something else everywhere else. He said that the witness who had become reluctant, he said he wasn't going to characterize what had produced that reluctance, but he said that a world in which witnesses became reluctant was a world in which the structure required constant maintenance. He said maintaining that structure consumed things. It consumed money and time and attention and eventually consumed people. He said he had watched it consume people. He said it was not a quick process and it was not a clean one. He said he hoped Anthony would think about what he actually wanted, not what had been arranged for him or what was expected of him or what the momentum of his circumstances was carrying him toward. What he actually wanted when he sat with himself and was honest about it. Anthony Ferrano sat with that for a moment. The three men in the gallery had not moved. The reporter's pen had not stopped moving. The clerk was looking at her desk. The room was holding something that it did not want to disturb. Anthony said, and he said it quietly enough that the room had to lean slightly toward it, he said that he appreciated what the judge was saying. He said it without the easiness he had carried in. He said it with something underneath it that was harder to name, something that might have been real if given enough room to be. Judge Caprio said he was glad. He said he meant everything he had said. He said none of it was personal and all of it was genuine. He addressed the citations. The illegal dumping carried a substantial fine. He noted the company's responsibility and applied the penalty clearly. He required documentation of the contractor's situation within 30 days and noted that failure to provide it would result in additional proceedings. He was specific and exact about what that meant and what it would require. The reckless driving citation he addressed on its merits. The fine was applied. He noted the addendum about the red light incident and said for the record that it remained an open question in the file, not resolved, not dismissed, simply noted. He said that notation would remain. He said one final thing. He said it directly to Anthony, and he said it without looking away. He said that his father's name had been in this city for a long time. He said that names accumulated weight over time, not always the kind of weight that helped you. He said that a young man who decided early enough that he was going to build something real, something that stood on its own without requiring the management of rooms and witnesses and outcomes, that young man had the chance to accumulate a different kind of weight, the kind that got lighter over time instead of heavier. He said he hoped Anthony would consider that. Anthony paid the fines. He stood for a moment after the transaction was complete, which was unusual. Most people moved away from the bench as soon as the business concluded. He stood for just a moment longer. Then he nodded once in a way that was not performative, in a way that was directed at no one in the room except the man behind the bench. Then he turned and walked back through the gallery, and the three men rose and followed him, and the door opened and closed, and they were gone. The courtroom resumed its ordinary rhythm. The next name was called. The clerk processed the file. The reporter looked at what he had written, and then looked at the door, and then looked back at what he had written. Outside later, one of the regular court watchers who had been present that morning said he had seen Judge Caprio handle difficult situations for years. He said he had seen him handle wealth and fame and anger and grief and every variety of human complexity. He said he had never seen him quite like that morning. He said it wasn't that the judge had been fearless, though he had been. He said it was something more specific than fearlessness. He said it was that the judge had looked at a situation that most people would have navigated very carefully, very obliquely, with a great deal of attention paid to what was not said, and he had chosen instead to say the true thing, the direct thing, the thing that acknowledged without flinching what was actually in the room while somehow making it about something larger than itself, about a young man and a choice in the direction of a life. He said he didn't know if it had landed. He said you never knew. He said some things you said to people went somewhere, and some things dissolved the moment the person walked out of the room, and there was no way to tell in the moment which kind you were dealing with. He said, but he thought it had landed. He said there was something in the way Anthony Ferrano had stood there that extra moment before he nodded and turned. He said there was something in the quality of that nod. He said he hoped he was right about that. He said he thought Judge Caprio probably hoped so too. He said that was the thing about that courtroom, about that man behind that bench. He said the cases ended and the people left and the file closed and the work continued, case after case, name after name, morning after morning. But the hoping didn't close. He said he believed the judge carried it with him. The genuine hope that the true thing said in the right moment to the right person at the right time did something, changed something, redirected something. He said that kind of hope, sustained over decades of watching people come and go, was either the most naive thing in the world or the most profound. He said he had decided it was the second one. He said the evidence was in the room every single morning.